All right, so here's the scene that I've made for our bouncing ball. You can see that I've got the ball, it's kind of a shiny yellow. I've got my ground plane with the use background shader on it. And then I put a few lights in that sort of match the colors of the lights in the background. And then there's a yellow one up in the front. And it's going to look kind of like this. So you can see I've got my reflectivity on the ground, and then it's sort of just in the space. So let's go ahead and just start setting some keyframes on the ball. So what we want to have is we want to have this ball sort of jumping kind of on its own every second or so. So the first thing that we need to do is talk about some of these things down here. We've got the timeline, which is this timeline right here. This is where you can actually scroll along, and you're just going to go down your animation right there. This right here is the beginning of your scene. That's frame 1. You can actually put a 0 or negative numbers if you need to at some point, but usually we just stick with 1. This is actually the first frame of what's visible here in the visible timeline. So this timeline doesn't always necessarily show the whole video. You can show just pieces of it. So like for instance right here, the end is 24, but the actual end of the whole animation that we have set up is 48. So, and then if you move this, you can also see that right here, this number changes. That's going to be the indicator of what frame you're actually on. And then we've also got this little slider. And if I take this 24 and sort of pull it out, you can see what happens is this is the whole length of the video now, 1 through 48 right here. And then maybe if you wanted to just see part of it, you could bring this forward. Now this is 10 through 45, and you can see the numbers changing there. And that's just a few different ways to sort of navigate around some of this stuff. We've also got jump to the beginning, jump frames, jump keyframes, play backwards, and then play forward, jump forward, keyframes, jump frames, and jump to the end. So, and we'll probably use quite a bit of those over the course of working with this, but let's go ahead and set up how long we want this to be. So what we want is we want something to play sort of on a loop, but we need to sort of make it a little bit long enough so that we can get the animation set up correctly. So I am going to actually make this 96 frames long. Now it's 24 frames for every second of animation, so a 96 frame animation is going to be 4 seconds long. That's just the math involved in making sure that you have the right timing. And then let's go ahead and go to the beginning, and we will just start setting some basic keyframes. Now we're going to have the main keyframes, or the primary keyframes, and that's going to be when the ball is on the ground and then also up in the air. And then we'll have some secondary keyframes in between when we start to do the squash and stretch. So let's go ahead first and just do the main keyframes. So this right here at frame 1, that's where I want my ball to actually sit. So that's going to be in the translate Y. And there's a lot of different ways that you can keyframe. Some people will just hit the letter S if they have something selected, and that will keyframe everything. And then let me see if I can go ahead. I'm actually going to just set this keyframe right here. This is the way I like to do it. I like to decide what I want to change, and then right-click in the channel box and come down to Key Selected. And now we have orange in this keyframe, and that means that I've set a keyframe there. Now you can hit S, and that will keyframe everything. So if I were to come down to, say, 24, which is going to be the next main keyframe, actually, let's go down to 12, because I'm just experimenting right now. If I move this up, and then I hit S, then everything keyframes. And some people like to work like this. I don't like to do this because there's a lot of extra keyframes that sometimes get created, and I have trouble sort of sorting that stuff out. Another thing that people sometimes do is they come down to this little key right here, and it's called auto key. And then what happens with auto key is that anytime you move anything, it just automatically keyframes. And that's another one where I sort of can't really predict sometimes what the keyframes are. And so personally for myself, I don't like to use that. So you can use whatever you want, what's easiest for you. I like to just change what I want and keyframe exactly what I've changed. So let me just undo back to here. So now for our low keyframes, that's going to be 1. We're going to be back on the ground at 24 again. So I'm going to go ahead and key that again right there. And then I'm going to go up to 48, key it again. And we're just nailing it down on all the places where it's going to be at the bottom. 72 and 96. And now I'm going to come back in and do my high frames, and those are going to be sort of halfway in between. So I'm going to go back here to frame 12, and then I'm going to put in a number 8. And you don't have to put in a number 8. You can just sort of raise the ball up however high you want to. It's up to you, but I'm going to go ahead and put a number 8 in there, and then I'll just key that. And then I'm actually going to just copy this keyframe, and all I did right here was right click and go up to copy. And then my next high frame is going to be 36. I'm just going to come up and just paste it right in there. I'm going to paste another one at 60. And then again, just right clicking and going up to paste. And now if I play this, if I take this button right here, go to the start of the playback range, I'm going to play this. And you can see I'm starting to have movement. Now, it's really terrible movement right now. One thing that we can do to make it a little bit easier to see, because we don't have very much in this scene, so it's sort of running through everything really quickly. I can come up here to Window, Settings and Preferences, and come down to where it says Time Slider, and take this playback speed from play every frame to play real time. And that will give you a little bit more of an accurate playback. So yeah, you can see this is what's happening with my ball right now. So it's just some very basic moves. It's not a very interesting bouncing ball. It doesn't look like it has weight. It doesn't feel like gravity is acting on it at all. It's pretty bad right now at this point. So we've got some work to do. The first thing that we're going to do is we're going to start thinking about a subject called slowing in and out. It's one of our principles of animation, and we're going to have to do some slowing in and out on this ball. It needs to be a little bit faster as it goes towards the low frames, and then slow down as it gets up to the top. Because what happens when a ball bounces is the ball sort of leaves the ground quickly because it's bounced off of it, and then as it gets higher and higher, it starts to slow down as the inertia of the ball stops being so effective, and it starts to get taken over by gravity and being pulled back down again. And then as it gets closer and closer to the ground, it's going to build up more momentum with the pull of gravity and go faster, and then bounce fast, and then go up to the top and start to slow down again. So that's what we have to create. And the easiest way to do that is in something called the graph editor. So I'm going to come up to Window, go to Animation Editors, Graph Editor, and we have this right here, and you can start to see a little bit of a wavy line. This is actually our keyframes, but it's really between only about 1 and 24. So if you want to see the whole line of keyframes, you can just hit letter A, sorry. And this is our keyframes. And what happens is with the graph editor, you have sort of the timeline down here, and then you have sort of the height of whatever the keyframes are. In this case, it's the translate Y. And it just graphs out all of your keyframes. And you can really do a lot of really fine tuning in the graph editor. This is something that you really want to try to get used to. It's a little bit weird to look at first, but it's something that you really want to really make friends with because it's going to be very helpful. So what's happening with our ball right now is it's just a smooth transition between the keyframes, and that's not going to be very realistic. If something is bouncing off the ground, it needs to be sort of a hard, sharp movement. So what we can do is we can change the tangents right now. What the tangents are just sort of how this line right here, if you select a keyframe, these are the tangents. So we can sort of change how those tangents act. If we go up here to the tangents menu, there's a lot of different things that you can do here. So I definitely encourage you to experiment with those and see what they're all about. But right now we're going to just change it to linear. And now we have just it's going to come down and bounce right up. So I'm going to squeeze this up a little bit so we can see better. And now you can see it's a lot better already. It's still not quite where it should be because it's a little too fast at the top, but that bounce at the bottom is looking a lot better. So what I need to do at the top here is to sort of make this curve a little bit wider so that it takes a little bit longer and it sort of hangs in the air a little bit longer. And what we can do to do that is do something called weighted tangents. So right now, all we can do, I can take this and I can move this and it can change sort of how the ball moves. And if I do this, you can sort of see, I'll start right here in the middle, and you can kind of see the difference about how that's working. It just sort of makes it move in a little bit different way. it sort of stays in the same speed and then sort of goes up a little instead of just being smooth like this. But what we need to do is widen this curve. So I'm going to take all these top frames right here, and I'm going to go over to curves and come down to weighted tangents. Because if you weight the tangents, then these little lines become things that you can sort of pull and stretch. So right now they seem to be locked, which is usually what happens when you do weighted tangents. You need to unlock the tangents. So you come up here to this little icon that has the little green box, and it's called free tangent weights. So I'll click that. And now what I can do is I can actually select, and I'm going to just hold down Shift and select one side of each of these tangents. And now if I hold down Shift again while I do this with the middle mouse button, I can actually stretch this out. And you don't want to do it too much because you don't want to hang in the air too long. But if you widen this curve just a little bit, just using the weighted tangents, you can get a little bit of a better sort of hang in the air. Do you see that? See how that looks a lot more like a bouncing ball would really look? And it might be a little bit too much. I'm actually going to probably just move this down a little. One thing that you have to remember is that when you're moving things in the graph editor, it's got to be the middle mouse button. It's not the left mouse button. That trips people up a lot. But let's go ahead and test this out again. And I think that's a lot better. So we're going to go with that for now. So let me go ahead and save this. I'm going to go ahead and go to File, Save Scene As, and then here in my bouncing ball project that I've already created, you can see if I go up in my folder hierarchy, you can see I've got all of my scenes and my folders and everything here. I'll go into the scenes. Whoops. So there's my Bouncing Ball 1 project, and then my scenes folder, and then I'll be saving in here. And I'm just going to call this Bouncing 2. Because again, you should always save sequentially instead of saving over the same file over and over again, because that's how you get yourself in trouble if something corrupts and you don't have anything left. So I'm going to go ahead and save that. And now the next thing that we need to think about is the squash and stretch. Because we need to make this ball sort of deform a little bit as it's bouncing, and it's going to just make it look more realistic and more sort of entertaining, and it's just going to be better. So we're going to do a little bit of squash and stretch on here. I'm actually going to stop this and go back to the beginning. And we're actually going to use, we're going to close down this graph editor for now. We're going to use what's called a squash handle. So I'm going to come up to the animation menu set and just go with my ball selected, create deformers, nonlinear, squash. And now you can see if I go to wireframe, it's easier to see, I think. You've got this sort of eye-shaped tool going through the middle of your ball, and the ball is now pink, which means that it's connected. So if I were to take this squash handle, and I go in the output, the inputs over here under the channel box, and change this squash factor, you can see that that ball is now going to squash and stretch. So that's the tool that we're going to use. Now for right now though, if I start to play this, do you see how it doesn't follow the ball? And we definitely need it to follow the ball. So I'm just going to, with this selected, just shift select the ball and hit P, and that's going to parent that squash handle to the ball. So now it's going to follow the ball. So we need to start setting some keyframes on this squash factor. You can, if you want, hit T and get the manipulator handle, and you can just pull this and decide how much squash and stretch you want, and then set the keyframes in the factor over here. I'm just going to put in some numbers. So here at the bottom, when it's at the bottom, that's when it's squashed. That's when it's on the ground. I'm just going to put in -0.5. And that's just going to squash it down a little. Now it's kind of come off the ground, and we're going to deal with that a little bit later. But I'm going to go ahead and key that right there. And then on my high frame, there's going to be no squash at all. So I'm going to key the factor back to 0. And then for my stretch, I'm actually going to go to the first one, and I'm going to use this jump forward frames, and I'm just going to go up to frame 3, and I'm actually going to put in a positive 0.5 in my factor and key it. So now you can see I have squash, stretch, and then it comes back to normal at the top. And that's sort of the pattern that we want. So I'm going to come along again, and my next low keyframe is going to be 24. So I'm going to put in negative 0.5 for that and key it. I'm actually going to step back, step back 2 frames. I'm going to put my stretch frame right in here, so it's positive 0.5. And then I'm going to go back to my low frame and step forward 2 more and put in another positive 0.5 and key that. And so you can start to see the pattern. You start squashed, you go forward 2 and you stretch out, and then you go back to the top and it goes back to normal. Then as you start to go back down, 2 frames before you hit the ground, it's going to stretch, then it's going to squash, and then go forward 2 and stretch again. That's the pattern. And you can actually take these and start sort of copying and pasting them down if you want to. You just have to remember that which are your low and your high frames. And so that's what I'm going to do. I'm just going to take this low frame, and then I'm just going to copy that keyframe, and I'm going to go up to 48. And you notice that it's stretched now, and that's because the last keyframe I have is stretched, and so it's going to stay stretched until I change it again. So I'm going to go to 48, paste in that low frame. We need to copy it again, it looks like. Copy that, and then go up to 48 and paste it. And then I'll go up to 72 and paste it right there. And then 96, and I'll paste it there. And now we can go ahead and see I've got this, and then it squashes out, and then it stays squashed for the rest of the time. So that's sort of what we need right now. So then I'm going to go back in and do my high frames. So that's going to be where there's no squash at all. I'm going to copy that frame there, go up to 36, paste that frame in, 60, and then 84. So now we've got our first little squash and stretch right there. And then it's going to go, and that didn't seem to work. So what you can also do is just put in a 0. And then it's going to squash again. And then I'll put in a 0 here. The thing about Maya is that there's a million ways to do everything. So if something doesn't look like you thought it would, there's always another way to do it. So that's what I'm doing right here. And now we're squashed again. And now we're just going to go alongside our low frames. I'm going to back up 2, change this to negative 0.5 again. Actually, that needs to be positive 0.5 because that's a stretch. So I'm going to stretch that out. And then I'll copy this. And then I'll step forward 2 more from that low frame forward and paste it. And then I'll come over to this next low frame. I'll back up 2, paste that frame in, come back to my low frame, step forward 2, because you just want to make sure that you have, you know, your stretches and your squashes right close together like this. And then my next low frame is here. I'm just going to back up 2 and paste it in. And now if I start this from the beginning and play this, you can see it's starting to squash and stretch a little bit like you would think a ball that's bouncing in a cartoon should do. So, and I'll go ahead and you can start to see what that looks like. So now there's a few other things that we need to do, and that's just because if you look at this, let's say I look at it from the side, here's my floor, when I go to my low frames, we're not actually touching the floor. And the other thing is that we can make the shape of this a little bit more like it's actually squashing down against the floor. And the way that we're going to do that is we're going to actually just select this squash handle itself and just set a few keyframes on it. So it's already following the ball, which is good, but we just need to do a little bit more with the keyframing. So here at frame 1, I'm actually going to be starting to set keyframes on the translate Y for this squash handle. So what I'm going to do is, because this is the center of the squash right there, right in the center of the handle, what I'm going to do is push this down so that it's right even with the floor. And that way the ball looks like it's actually squashing against the floor. So I'm going to do that, and I'm just going to key that right there on my low frame. And then I'll go ahead and just do the same thing on the rest of my low frames. I'm going to go ahead and copy this keyframe and then come up to 24. And actually, you know, it's sort of going to already look like that because I've just put in a keyframe, but I'll just make sure to put in another keyframe so that it pins it there every time. 48, 72, and 96. And now in the middle here, that's actually probably going to be fine. But what we need to sort of think about is if you start to play this, it's that sort of second stretch on the way down that it's sort of backwards. To see what's happening is it's going to sort of jump up and the mass is leading the action, which is what's supposed to happen. But when it gets up to here and it starts to come back down, then the mass is not leading the movement anymore. It's sort of lagging behind. So we're going to just do a little bit with that. So we're going to go to this low frame right here and just back up 2. And just take this keyframe and just move it so that the center is at the top of the ball. And just key that right there. Now let's go ahead and check and make sure that that looks how it should. It's going to lead the mass of the ball like that. It's going to come back to just being round. And now then the mass of the ball is leading the bounce down. And then it's squashing. So that's all that we have left to do is just take this keyframe where we've actually moved this up, copy that, and then on every low frame, just back up 2 and paste that keyframe right in. Going to go to this low frame as well, back up 2, paste that frame in, and then the very end here, I'll back up 2. And paste that frame in. Now, when we play this, it's going to look a lot better now. Except that that didn't really work, did it? That didn't work. Okay, so again, we'll just have to go back and just check and make sure. And if it didn't work, we'll just go back to those same keyframes that we pasted in, because we know where they are now, because they're marked down here. Every time you see a little red line, that means there's a keyframe. And then we'll just rekey it. There's going to be a lot of times where you sort of do something and it's not quite what you wanted, and you'll have to rekey it. That's just something that you have to get used to as an animator in Maya. And you should always, always check at what you've done. See, because if I had just assumed that those keyframes were correct and not checked, I wouldn't have ever known, and then the ball would be wrong. So let's check again. And that seems to be a lot better. You can actually sort of slowly move through it as well. And I think that'll do. So that is animation on the ball. So in the next section, we're going to talk about how to batch render and how to compile it into a video.